first spinoff in the John Wick universe is now in theaters. Is it a clean kill or a near miss? Let's find out.
You've seen it before, haven't you?
Once more unto the bridge, dear friends.
Again and again until we're both dead.
There's only like 12 stories. They change around little details, but they're all pretty much the same.
Deja vu. Something very familiar about it.
Hello, welcome to You've Seen It Before, movie reviews to connections of mind. Ballerina from the world of John Wick is directed by Len Wiseman. It is the first film spun off from the John Wick universe. It is taking place in the time frame during and immediately after John Wick Chapter 3. And this time around, it features Ana de Armas as Eve Macaro, a assassin in the Roscaroma who was rescued as a young girl after a trauma of her father being killed by a rogue tribe of assassins. And when she is finally grown up and in the world of the High Table, she finds a link to this rogue tribe and goes on a plot of revenge to avenge her father's death. Now, this review will contain spoilers of Ballerina, as well as certain other things. I'll be doing my spoiler-free thoughts first and foremost, though, but just so you know, there will be spoilers later on in this review. So, first things first, let's get into some spoiler-free talk on Ballerina. Is this a good action movie? How does this rank up with the other John Wick movies? Is this a good theater experience? I would say this is actually, I was pleasantly surprised by this, with various spin-offs, set in the world of various franchises. They can be kind of hit and miss. This one, I'd say, largely hit. Ana Armas is great as an action star. She's obviously got great stunt team behind her, and great choreography. The fights are, for the most part, not cut to death. And where I think this movie sets itself apart from the other John Wick movies, and I did rewatch all 4 John Wick movies prior to seeing this, and what I find interesting when I revisit the franchise is that, I've always said that there's somewhat of a diminishing returns with each passing movie, just because they feel the need to, any movie franchise feels the need to one-up themselves, but the John Wick franchise also feels the need to innovate, and it's like, all right, what new are we bringing to the table with this movie? Which, frankly, there are plenty of movie franchises that don't take that step. They'll be just rehash the same thing over and over and over again. And with Ballerina, there's some actually inventive fight scenes, and some action scenes that are unique spins on it. I like it's kind of funny when they play with expectations where, especially, for instance, you have the scene where it's like, all right, she goes to the undercover, gun salesman with all the high tech, the assassin weaponry, and you go through the montage. It's like, all right, we're going to walk her through all these great guns, and we have this whole scene but then no, there's an action scene that breaks out in the middle of it, and it's like, well, what are you going to do then? So fun expectations on that front. And also, probably one of the more, some of the more inventive things are, you see, there's one scene where you only get to see the aftermath of what happened. A lot of the great things in the John Wick movies is you see these great, these fun choreographed action scenes, often one-shots. This one it's left to the imagination. It's like, oh man, there are so many dead guys in there. Like, how did this come to be? And you get to imagine this. So it's stuff like that where I think this movie does a great job in setting itself apart from the other John Wick movies, but also feeling right at home in this franchise. And like I said, Ana de Armas, she does a very good job with her role in this. I find her a fairly compelling action star, and I would be very happy to see her pop up in more projects like this. Aside from that, though, and I feel like this movie kind of got in its own way a little bit to differentiate itself. Like it did some things well, and but other things it didn't so well is that one of the charms of the John Wick franchise was, there's a certain simplicity to it. It's like, all right, John Wick, these guys, first John Wick movie, these guys broke in, killed his puppy and stole his car, and now he's going to go on a huge murder spree. It's simple, to the point. That's all you need to know. Here, you've got this revenge plot. All right, so she killed her. Her father was killed by this tribe. Now she's going to find out evidence later and go on revenge. Cool. But, like I said, we've seen that in so many other things, and while there are, the John Wick franchise, I think as a whole, has been somewhat rightly criticized in the fact that, you're adding to the lore of the High Table and all this, and it starts to get in the way of the fun action when people go to see these movies in the first place. Here, they try to build some lore, they have some instructions, but it feels like they're trying to go too many directions at once, and they don't focus enough on any of them. And so what we get is kind of a half-baked idea of lore expansion, and when it focuses on that, it really does drag things down. And, and reveals that I think are supposed to be huge, like, emotional things aren't. Like, for instance, no spoilers, but there's a reveal in the third act of, one of the assassins after Armis's character, we find out something about this person, and it's supposed to be like this great reveal. It's like, oh my gosh, that's that, but it gets cut short like really fast, and I'm like, why? All right, does that really add anything? Like, why is that there? And along those lines of why is this there? So I'm going to tread lightly because there is some spoiler elements to this, but I will say, and it's probably in the marketing, and if not, it's probably not a great secret. John Wick does make an appearance in this movie, a couple times actually. One in the beginning because it kind of retcons the facts of how events are portrayed in John Wick Chapter 3. So on Naru's character, you see her kind of in play a role that wasn't necessarily hers in the original movie. That's just because it came out 5 years ago, and that wasn't meant to. But it's a fun retcon. I like that thing. Where John Wick shows up later, it's fine, but I'm not entirely certain it's necessary. I feel like it was only included because maybe the studio was concerned that Ana de Armas was not going to be able to carry the weight, carry this movie by herself, and I think that's a little unfair. To be honest, I understand why they thought that, but I think this movie, when you see the movie as a whole, I question whether it's those scenes were really necessary to begin with, and it really does distract you from what could be, focus more on your main character, Eve. She's got the story, and she has an interesting arc as well. We get to see an interesting dynamic with a new character played by Norman Reedus, and it's like, all right, so this guy, and he's got this package. Like, oh well, and again, I'm trying to not do any spoilers at the moment, but that's like, all right, oh, that changes things. How's this going to affect things? And like, it plays into her arc throughout the rest of the movie as well. And it could have focused more on that. And if you wanted to add something, you could have built out her relationship with the main villain of this movie, but it really doesn't. And I think that's where this movie does falter a little bit. That being said, the inventiveness of the action, the overall competence of the action, and really the strength of Ana de Armas's screen presence does elevate this movie enough to where it's not the best movie in the franchise by any means. I would say, I would rather put on, John Wick's 2, 3, or 4 over this, but, like I said, but if you're in to compare this with the original John Wick, maybe, then I think you have a little bit more of a comparison. I might prefer this over the original John Wick. Personally, I think after rewatching all of them, I'd probably have to say 2 is probably my favorite of the franchise. But these movies, the John Wick franchise as a whole does set the bar so high that to be tied for last place in this franchise is not a slight on it by any means. But that being said, I would say, is it going to attract newcomers or maybe people who aren't familiar with the John Wick franchise? Maybe not. But if you're looking for a tight, well-paced action romp, this is definitely a movie to go see. And I would say if I was going to give Ballerina from the World of John Wick a letter grade, I would say this is a B-. So that's why I think I was B-, C+. I think it's a little bit better than average, but not by much. And if I was going to weigh this movie in on the scale of unoriginality, I would say this weighs in at original enough. It's a passing grade, but not anything to be overly proud of. So those are my main spoiler-free thoughts on Ballerina. Now let's get to some spoiler talk as to certain plot developments and character arcs that may seem familiar to you and where you may have seen them before. So, like I tried to be cagey before, so the reveal that the one member of this team of hunters going after Eve is, in fact, her sister who was left behind to be raised by this cult or whatever, and Eve got to be raised outside of that. It just made me think of the Acolytes, really, of the sisters who were separated at a young age and raised by different, martial arts organizations, essentially. I would hesitate to say that, the Jedi are killer organizations, by, at least not primarily, but, that goes down to a deep rabbit hole. But you get the point. One's Jedi, one's Sith, and, with Eve and her sister, one is being raised by the equivalent of the Sith in this universe, and one is raised by the tribes under the High Table, which are not good people by any means. There's still a bunch of assassins, but yeah, you get the drift. You got these two systems going on, and also the fact that this cult basically has taken over this town in, I guess it's Austria, maybe Switzerland, in the Alps somewhere in there. And you got Eve, the lone warrior going into this town full of assassins to kill this one man, or also to rescue the daughter or whatever. It made me think a lot of the Wolverine, the fact that Logan has to go to this town in Japan where the daughter is, but it's a company town controlled by the villain, and he's got the assassins. The ninjas, patrolling the area. So, I mean, yeah, you see these connections, and, I mean, those are my main points. Like I said, the whole, going on a revenge trip to avenge your father, you could list a million different movies with that premise. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole with this. I will say, to close this out, the best action scene, I think, in this, in my opinion, is with the grenades. That was like, oh, that's different. It does, the John Wick franchise always stretched the credibility of, could they really survive that, even with the Kevlar lined suits or whatever. It's like, if you're getting like blasted into wood support beams or whatever, oh, you broke your back on that front. Which, speaking of, the timeline, I think they did really well in establishing, all right, so this, the first bit is the beginning of John Wick 3, and then they do a 2 months later cut, but then we see John Wick, when he shows up near the end, he's like completely healed, and it's like, at the end of John Wick 3, like, we know that is a weeks timeline because it starts with the adjudicator gives him like 7 days, and he's back in New York to avenge them for that. So we know it's about a week, maybe week and a half timeline on that front. But then 2 months later, the end of John Wick Chapter 3, we saw him get shot off a roof and, ricochet down to the street. And he was, having to get taken underground with a shopping cart, and he was not in good shape. So I feel like 2 months is really optimistic for a recovery on that front. But that's just me. Like I said, the best action scene is the grenades. And I think the coolest action scene was the reveal of the flamethrowers and the flame, but I feel like that got a little overplayed. Like, all right, it's cool, she's blasting people with flamethrowers, then you got dueling flamethrowers, it's like, yeah, okay, this is starting to get a thing, and then by the time she's fighting the flamethrower with the fire hose, it's like, I'm pretty sure Mythbusters did this exact same thing, and they showed it wouldn't work, so it's like, no, that got a little overplayed, I think, by the end, but still pretty cool. Those are my main thoughts on Ballerina. What did you think of the movie? Did you like it? Did you not like it? What about my analysis? Do you agree, disagree? Did I miss something? Let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate whatever audience I can get. Be sure to look for my next movie review, which will be for F1, the movie, which comes out to the end of June. And if you like this video or any other video on my channel, please give me a like, share, and especially subscribe. I would very much appreciate it. Again, thank you so much for watching, but just remember, there is nothing new under the sun. And yes, you have seen it before.